Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gary Summers, and welcome to Mind, Body, Soul, a show about your mental, physical, and spiritual wellness. My guest today is the founder of Ocean Yoga, a certified Hatha yoga teacher with a focus on mindfulness and trauma sensitivity. He is a meditation and mindfulness instructor in the Buddhist tradition, is the Buddhist pastoral care worker at Her Majesty's Penitentiary, and is the manager at Bridges to Hope Food Aid Center. He is also an advocate for those suffering from mental health and addictions issues, as he has struggled with these same issues for decades. Jody Williams is here to talk about how he uses the ancient tools of yoga to overcome modern day anxiety and stress. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you for having me.
When I reached out to the community of healthcare workers, how many people told me, get Jody Williams on the show, because you have a story. Yeah. So, Jody, just give our listeners a brief idea as to what they can expect to hear from you today.
Well, today we'll get into a little bit about my personal journey to give the listeners some context from kind of where I come from and how that would relate to everything else that I would talk about. And then we'll discuss some of the tools of both yoga and meditation. So when I say yoga and meditation, I won't keep saying it throughout, but so yoga to me and meditation are one. So meditation's a part of yoga.
Okay.
So just want the listeners to be clear on that. And then some of those tools that I utilize and I teach others to utilize. And then importantly, in some of the pitfalls that we might come upon along the way. You know, the mindfulness in yoga, it's not the cure-all that sometimes it's marketed to be. Certainly there are some things we need to look out for.
Jody, can you talk to us about your own struggles with anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, I've had anxiety. I can't remember not having it. Going back to even a child, my mom had an anxiety disorder and depression. So I think I either inherited it or just being around it, I picked up on it a lot. But the main thing was from 9 until I was 12, I was an altar boy and I was abused during those times, which really led to a lot of childhood trauma, which I'm just kind of studying and learning about and just starting to reconcile that at 45 years old. I kind of repressed a lot of it. The sexual stuff, the physical abuse, I kind of acknowledged, but certainly I repressed a lot of it. Now I can see why I had anxiety through my teenage years and my 20s, which led to major drug addiction and just trying to repress some things. My lowest of low.
I think, Jody, people probably feel that they're at that low and they have no way. They don't know how to get out of it. They may be alone. They may not have anybody to help them. So, I mean, you're living proof that you were there. And now look where you are now.
No, that's right. My lowest low in 2000, the millennial, literally the New Year's Eve of the millennial, I was on an 80-day ecstasy binge and I had overdosed, which I ended up in the hospital. And I was in the hospital that night, and I woke up in the hospital, and it's kind of like you're waking up to these big bright lights and inside, I didn't really have a lot of cognition, or I was certainly kind of blank. And a friend of mine was there, and there was a cop outside. And back then, ecstasy was new, so the cop, I guess, might have been interested in where I got it. And my friend, he went out, and the cop wasn't there, and he said, "Oh, the cop's not there. He must be gone." So we literally escaped. He took me and left the hospital, and we left the hospital and went to my house. And I took the next flight home. I was living in New Brunswick at the time, and I took the next flight home to Grand Falls to go. But I had no choice but to kind of go back living with my parents because I was so. I can only describe it as I didn't have a mind, or I was blank from doing this 80 days of ecstasy.
Every day?
Yeah, for a long time. But and I remember my dad picking me up at the airport, and it was one of the worst moments of my life. Just him looking at me. Seeing me 50 pounds lighter than the last time he saw me, and and my dad's kind of old school, so there was no talking. We drove an hour from Gander to Grand Falls with no talking, and then I just went in home. I went in the room, And then I went in the room and I never came out. I stayed in the room for 30 days. And my mom would just bring the food to me and stuff, and just stayed in that room. So that was my lowest of my low.
Was that the turning point for you? Was that when you decided, I've had enough?
Yeah, I mean, it's really scary. Plus, too, I used to be suicidal, a lot of suicidal ideation. You know, there's times I've been driving on the highway, for instance. I left detox once, so I had a lot of times where I had relapse, and I get back on. So that was the beginnings of something. But after that, I still I still kind of kept going, right? Because I had this trauma, and I didn't know I had trauma.
Sure. Yeah.
Only now do I know, in my 40s, do I like, oh, I have trauma and I'm dealing with it. But I remember leaving the detox down in the Kitty Vitty there, and I knew I had some drugs at home. And I was like, man, I can't go home. I just spent 8 days getting clean. And I remember getting my cat, and I went in long enough to get my cat and to get on the highway, and I was like, I'm just going to go home again. To home again, right? So each time everything happens, I go home. So I was going to go home and go to the cabin and just spend some time there. And I remember being on the highway, and every time a transport truck would come at me, like all I wanted to do was just stare into that transport truck. Like everything in me, it took everything in me to not stare. Like everything in my mind was like, just do it, just do it. You know why I didn't do it? Compassion for my cat saved my life. I swear that's what saved my life.
And it just takes one thing, doesn't it?
Compassion.
Just one thing, yeah.
Compassion.
So, Jody, how did you go from the lowest of the low to at a point now where you're actually helping people?
Well, I've always been very spiritual, like since as far as I can remember, like in an odd way. Like, I loved church as a child. I remember when I was 10, I had taken this vow that I would go to church like every day for a year, and I did it. Yeah. I went to Mass every day for a year. I moved to my grandmother's house because she lives next door to the church. And even back then, I was very spiritual. And then in my 20s, I started exploring Buddhism, meditation, and I had met, who's now my current teacher. I met him, and at the time, even when I used to do meditation retreats, I would go out and smoke weed, and people would be like, well, he's smoking weed. What's he doing smoking weed at a retreat? And I would go to my teacher and I'd be like, I know people are talking about me. Like, you want me to leave? And he just always accepted me. He's like, nope, I want you to stay. And I said, well, what about the drugs? He's like, you just keep practicing, and that'll work itself out. So I met someone that accepted me, and I've never accepted myself. So that for me, that was like really transformational. Like to have someone who didn't judge me, accepted me. Said, screw all them. I'm your teacher. You come. You're more than welcome to come to mine, and I'll deal with them if they say anything to me.
What do you think? And I know you've got an incredible story to tell us about mindfulness. What do you think people are? This explosion of yoga and meditation has just gone so far in such a short period of time.
A couple of things. One, I think there was something that church provided, which none of us go to church anymore, but I do certainly think the church supplied something, whether it was a sense of community or something that's kind of lacking. Now, I'm not saying that the modern day yoga studio is a church, but certainly I'm thinking it's filling that gap a little bit. Again, isolation from social media, which is supposed to make us feel more connected, is actually making us feel disconnected. So for me, like when I look at my news feed or whatever, right, I can feel like the anxiety kind of as I'm going through, little hints of it. A lot of my clients get sent to me by the doctor, specifically. And then the other thing, at the end of a yoga class, I don't know if you ever guys been to a yoga class, but generally there's a thing called the yoga buzz at the end that you get. So my theory on this, and I'm 99% sure it's happening, is that we're constantly living in a bit of fight or flight mode in our modern day culture. We're always kind of revved up in the nervous system. And at the end of the yoga class, I think people are experiencing a regulated nervous system that they don't experience. Now, they wouldn't say that is why they like yoga, but it's just experiential, and it brings you back.
It just allows you to slow down.
Yeah. I mean, in this world today, like, it's funny because, if I say I'm stressed out, it's a badge of honor. And if I say I have anxiety, it's considered a weakness, and they're both synonyms. Stressed out, it's like, yes, you're doing good. Then That's yoga, but meditation, I think, attracts an older crowd. It's a bit more of an advanced practice. Being yoga today is a bit body centric. But meditation kind of generally would attract an older crowd who are looking for a sense of liberation, in the words of the Buddha, or a sense of freedom. And then freedom from that constant feeling of lack or low self-worth or self-hatred even that a lot of people come to me with. And then if you practice mindfulness, so what happens is before you practice mindfulness, you have these underlying thoughts that are controlling you to act in certain ways, but you're not aware of the thought pattern. So mindfulness, I wouldn't say you become your own therapist, but certainly allows you to see things that you've probably never seen before.
You said, and I thought it was a great comment. You said, yoga teaches you to love yourself. Is that what the comment you made? Something like that?
Meditation is the art of making friends with yourself.
Oh, that's it, right.
Making
that's
friends
it.
with yourself.
Making friends with yourself.
So I will tell you a story now about that. So I teach, a little while ago I had a grant from the government to do a 12-week recovery group in the prison system. So it was good because I got to work with 8 guys over 12 weeks. So I had a lot of time to repeat a lot of ideas and to really get into practicing mindfulness and sharing. So the program would be, we do a little bit of yoga, because yoga, the asana, the movement part, helps to get trauma and release some stuff from the body. And in people that have trauma, you don't want to just get them to meditate. You want to get the body moving first before you try to regulate the mind.
Sure.
And then we would sit and we would do some meditation. And I would give them homework every week to do when they're in their cell. And then we would share. And at the end, and so the sharing was very transformational in that there was no talking back. So when you shared, it was your time, right? And in prison, like, that doesn't really happen. So after we were on the very last night, and I came to one of the tougher guys, we'll say, in the group, and he kind of had his head down because I think he was tearing up a little bit, and he's like, "I want to thank you." And I said, "Well, go ahead. Like, thank me for what?" And he said, "Well, like, I knew he was a drug dealer in there. We all did." He said, "A guy last week ratted me out." And he said, in here, the rule is if you rat someone out, right, you end up in the hospital, legs get broken, or, there has to be accountability. So he said, I waited for a few days, and he said, I finally got this guy alone. And he said, he had his hand up, and he was like, he had him up off the floor, and he was choking him, and he had his fist pulled back, and he was about to punch him, and he said, your voice popped into my mind, and he said, all I heard was, don't be a prisoner of your own mind. And he said, for the first time in his life, he did not react to anger. And he just let the guy down. And then the guy punched himself in the face so that everyone else would think that he got revenge.
Wow.
Yeah. And that guy is out now, and he didn't. So there's a 50% rate of returning to prison. And none of the guys I've worked with have ended up back in there.
So, Jody, not to relate it to prison life, but can you talk a little bit about mindfulness and how it relates to everyday anxiety and what maybe some people can do to help themselves?
No, sure. And again, in my opinion, modern day culture, everyone has anxiety. It's just a matter where it is on the spectrum, right? Your lifestyle. There's a quote I use whenever I'm teaching people. It's between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. So mindfulness really is about expanding a space between a stimulus. So that stimulus and anxiety usually doesn't have to come from outside. So the stimulus can actually be our own thought that's causing the anxiety. What the meditation does, it allows you, and mindfulness, is you start to become aware of these neurotic thought patterns. And until you really have some kind of practice where you slow down and look at yourself, you can go your whole life and be completely controlled by these neurotic thoughts. And then the mindfulness practice, your mind is like taken over. I say you're living from the head up, right? So the way out is to become back to the body. So you can come back to sensation, whether it's just sensations in your hands. You can come back. Usually we use the breath. But for some people, depending on trauma, breath's not always an option. Mantra you can use. Anything that's happening in real time, you can use as an anchor for mindfulness. So I will teach, like in prison, the main thing I teach is walking meditation, because you can just practice it anytime and no one even knows you're doing it. So you literally will place your attention on your heel, then your sole, and then your toes, and you just keep doing that, right? And over time, it gets you out of your head, for sure. And then the other thing is to, we have these conversations, right? It's like last night, I was kind of lying on the couch, and I was like having this whole big conversation I was going to have with someone, and I was having all this anxiety, and then I was like, dude, you're just on the couch. And I realized, and then the anxiety just stopped instantly, because I had a clearer vision of like, this is all just made up. I'm just making it up, right?
Mark Twain said, I've been through some terrible things in my life. Some actually happened to me.
Yeah, exactly right, exactly. So, another thing is today's version of mindfulness, the secular thing that like they're teaching at Google and stuff, I don't personally agree with. Buddhism, but mindfulness comes from Buddhism. So the new mindfulness thing kind of bugs me a little bit, because it's trying to sell and commodify a spiritual system. And if you ever were to ask someone, what does mindfulness mean? It means being in the present moment. Okay, so let me explain that a little bit. So that's like kind of kindergarten mindfulness, in that they teach snipers mindfulness so they can be more mindful when they're about to kill someone, so they can slow their heart rate down. So from a Buddhist perspective, mindfulness has to have a right mindfulness. It has to cause no harm to you or others. But what I teach people is like, when you feel appreciation, you are mindful. When you stop and look at a sunset, you're naturally mindful. When you are looking and you see that your child smiling back at you, and you get that warm feeling, you're already mindful. So appreciation to me is mindfulness, in the sense of, again, not just kind of being in the present moment. You can be in the present moment and still be a pretty mean person.
I tell people to practice appreciation, you develop a gratitude list.
Mm-hmm.
And all the people in your life you're grateful for, the things that you have, your values, your integrity, and when you read that enough, you just focus on the things that you have as opposed to the things that you don't have. Jody, great conversation. Jody, you have a wonderful story about being a smoker for 30 odd years, and now being smoke free for just about a year. And I'd love for you to tell our listeners the vision that you had, because I always say to my clients, you have to be able to choose something that you're excited about, that's going to keep you on that journey. And you've got a wonderful story of being able to kick this dirty habit.
Yeah. So, I had a major cocaine addiction for a while, and they say like cocaine's kind of the hardest one to kick. And I kept smoking was my last thing. And for a while, I didn't even plan on quitting smoking. I was like, that's my last thing. I'm saving it. But I have a 9-year-old beautiful daughter, and the smokes these days, right? They have a picture on the front or something, So every now and then she would see that, and sometimes she would cry, and I'm gonna cry now talking about it. But she would break down in tears, and show me the pack and be like, Daddy, how can you do this? Like, I don't understand. Don't you love me? And I was like, man. And then a couple of months more went by. And then I was really having trouble like walking upstairs. And the other thing is I'm a yoga teacher. So there was always that shame of being in the health business. And it was my last thing I smoked, right? So I was like, what am I going to do? I need to create something. So then it just occurred to me. It's like, it literally just popped into my head. I had a vision of myself lying in the hospital bed with the breath thing on me, not able to breathe, and my little daughter sitting next to me and just calling me out and being like, Daddy, you said you were going to quit. You didn't love me enough to quit. And then what I would do is, and then for leading up for 2 weeks before I quit, I would use that vision. And then there's a thing in yoga called Yoga Nidra, in which you do this usually a 30 long minute guided meditation. And in that meditation, you take on an intention called a sankalpa, which is in the present tense. So for 2 weeks I am free from my addiction and the cause of my addiction. And then whenever I would crave a cigarette, I would put the vision of my daughter next to me in my hospital bed. So for me, that was the final what worked for me.
And those two big words, I am,
Mm-hmm.
are so powerful.
Yeah, present moment.
That present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I say to people too is if you can't really get your head around I am, the next best thing is to say is I am in the process of.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you can't argue with being in the process of. If you can get to I am and get excited about that and get a vision of I am, because your brain doesn't know the difference between
Mm-hmm.
what's happening inside of it and what's happening outside
Exactly.
of it. So you can trick your brain into saying I am,
Mm-hmm.
or the next best thing is I am in the process of. So good for you. Good for
Yeah,
you.
I
And
mean-
so that just shows what you're doing, the work that you do can work for on yourself as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, so I went from, because like for 10 years, the word was I should quit smoking.
Right. Or I want to.
I want to quit smoking.
Those words kind of lack commitment, don't they, Jody?
No, there's certainly not. And again,
I'll try.
once I framed it as if I had already quit, even though I wasn't quit yet. I am free from smoking, and the cause. Not only did I want to be free from smoking, that was only the beginning. I want to be free from the cause of my smoking.
Right.
Right? From like the cause, which is because again, the smoking is a symptom of trying to cover up something.
What were you trying to cover up?
Anxiety, a discomfort that we have. Again, like we all have a sense of lack, and as a smoker, that becomes your little thing. And smoking's very habitual, even now. So mudras are a part of yoga. Mudras are hand gestures you do. So now when I want to smoke, I do mudras, for instance, because I still want my hands to be smoking.
So that's kind of an anchoring type of
Absolutely,
effect.
yeah, and it has an effect after a while, and it's very powerful because the more you do it, the more it has a connection, right?
If for our listeners, if you want to explore anchoring, go Google anchoring, because it's an NLP technique that helps you neuro-linguistic programming,
Mm-hmm.
and it's anchoring is basically to be able to create whatever feeling you want to create by creating a vision and a movement that anchors that feeling that and it's really powerful, and as Jody just mentioned, it works. Jody, you talked about yoga and how it's helped you. What would you consider the most powerful tools in yoga that have helped you?
For me personally, yoga and both Buddhism. So again, like yoga, I know when everyone hears yoga, right, all they think is like people doing those poses in their skinny clothes and their tight clothes. So I kind of, to me, it's like a ethics. So the first ethics in both yoga and Buddhism is ahimsa, which is practicing no harm. So I had a lot of self-hatred, and I did do self-harm. I was a drug addiction. I used to cut myself. I did all kinds of things that harm myself. So to start practicing this no harm to myself was very transformational. And one of the other things in yoga is called santosha. And san means complete, and tosha means acceptance. So, and the English word would be contentment, to start cultivating contentment. Because again, like anxiety might come from, again, that sense of like you're looking at your Instagram and like, she's on a beach, she's wearing a new dress, and you're just sitting there like, oh, my life sucks.
Because they post their best.
Exactly, it's discontent. So, and then but contentment is something that we can be cultivated. So when I practice in the morning, part of my morning meditation practice is I bring in a contentment practice at the end. Just knowing like over 6,000 people die every hour. Just knowing that, just saying that to yourself.
And people,
and you didn't. You're here. We're here.
yeah, people. It's nice to know that there are people who are a lot worse off than you are.
Exactly.
But
Mhm.
people get up every day and struggle,
Exactly.
and it's about being aware of what you have, of being grateful for what you have, not worried about how come my neighbors can have 2 vacations, how come they can drive these cars, how come they can do this, and we spend so much time looking outward, we don't spend enough time working on the one thing that we have control over, ourselves and our thoughts.
The Buddha said that happiness will never come to those who fail to appreciate what they already have.
So there you go.
I live despite like my story, it sounds like I lived a really hard life. I also lived a very rich, full life. There was a time when my goal was to live to 35. I'm at 45 now, so and I'm not joking. My goal in my 20s was like, I just want to make it to 30. If I can get to 35 without killing myself, I'm gonna be happy.
Because it was that you were that low.
Oh yeah, I wanted out. My suicide or my overdose was not really accidental. I didn't care if I overdosed, right? So yeah, and so contentment to me is like, I work at a food bank. I run a food bank by day. I work in the prison system. It's not very hard for me to find my own contentment. I'm around marginalized people all day. I have food. I have a house.
But you go back to HMP.
Oh yeah, I go back, and I'll always go back.
and because obviously there are those people in there struggle every single day.
You'll never meet anyone in your life who struggle as much as people at the HMP. I've never met people who struggled so much, and like they made a mistake. I know there's a lot of people out there that might have compassion for them. They are human. I go in there. I sit with murderers. I sit with rapists, pedophiles, and you'd realize I was molested. So for me to sit with a pedophile,
ooh, yeah,
and to just be there for them and listen. But I will honestly say, and this is true, I'm not making up, everyone I meet is remorseful. They're not proud to be in there. They're not proud of what they've done. They're all scared to death to be in there. They don't admit it because they got to man up, but they're so scared, because it's like they're in a prison. So yeah, for me to find contentment is very easy because I'm always around discontentment. So it's easy for just the justice position between my life and theirs, right?
So Jody, we're almost out of time, and
Mm-hmm.
and we'd love to have you back again to talk about some more things. Can you sum up and give our listeners, because you talked about meditation as the practice of making friends with yourself. Can you just finish off and just give people an idea of how people can feel better about themselves?
Sure. So when most people come to me at meditation instruction, the number one thing is they have a low self-worth. They don't like themselves. And my first thing I'll always ask them, and they don't know why I'm asking them until after, I'll say, what qualities would you like in a best friend? And they're always the same ones, right? Honesty, loyalty, patience, kindness, sense of humor. And then I say to them, well, can you apply those to yourself? That's what I want. That's what your meditation practice is going to be. If you want to really transform, you're going to take these qualities. People don't want to hear it, especially if you do have a low self-worth. Like I know when my teacher first taught me that, I started shaking. I was so revolted by the fact of being my own best friend. I couldn't even imagine that. But slowly over time, I started, as part of your meditation practice, and all these practices, right, they're meant to transform our lives. So like when you're sitting there and you're meditating for 15 minutes, to me, like that's not the value. The value is when I get up and I go interact with my coworker and I go interact with someone who's pissing me off and I'm able to not react in a way that's negative, or you know what I mean? So like, and even when I do yoga, it's not about when I'm on the mat, as it's about like, and when you're on the mat, so I'll give you, so in a typical yoga class, this is how I teach a balanced posture. A balanced posture, most people are going to probably fall out, okay? So some people would teach that posture as a physical thing, and your leg has to go here, and you're here, and you're here. I teach balanced postures as a way to really look at your mind. What do you say to yourself when you fail and fall out of that posture?
Absolutely.
What is the tone of your voice? Are you mad? Do you say, I suck at this? Or do you just smile and come back in? And if you can do that, you can really change your life.
Yeah, it's about what have I learned from what just happened to make myself a better person.
Mm-hmm.
Jody, we're out of time. Jody, eye-opening.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, listen, with all the requests that I got to have you on the show, it would be kind of difficult not to. I think I would have been lynched. Everybody, I know everybody got some great advice from Jody Williams. We're out of time this week.